Hello, my name is Halford Fairchild. I am Professor Emeritus at Pitzer College, and we are coming to you live on Facebook and Instagram from McConnell Living Room at Pitzer College in beautiful Claremont, California. Our program today is Writing for World Peace, making students to become producers of knowledge. And I'm here with a student, a senior from Pitzer College, Mr. Samuel Martin. Say hello, Sam.
Hey everyone, I'm Samuel Martin. I'm a senior at Pitzer College, major in environmental analysis, minor in econ.
I'd like to give Sam a real props because he was one of the students in our class who was most enthusiastic and most successful in writing for world peace. But before I get into that, I wanted to get into a little bit of the background into this project. It happened that I took an early retirement from Pitzer College in the 2015-2016 school year. I retired from Pitzer College at the end of June 2016. I was entering my last year of teaching in the fall of 2015. In the summer of 2015, a horrific thing happened that some of you people will remember. It was a young man who took it upon himself to enter into a Bible study in South Carolina, Emmanuel Baptist Church. And while people had their eyes closed in prayer, he pulled out a gun and he shot and killed 9 people, many of them elderly. He said he wanted to start a race war. My heart broke for those people. And in the weeks following, we heard instances of mass shootings and public shootings here and there, everywhere. And we know about problems of domestic terrorism and violence in the world at large. And so as I entered fall 2015, and I was going to teach my seminar in social psychology, I felt as though it was incumbent upon me as a social scientist to try to do something to bring the knowledge that we have as social scientists to try to solve this problem of gun violence and of violence more generally in America. And so I taught a seminar in social psychology. I had 5 students, and those 5 students and I wrote this book. This is a placard describing it or showing it, Resolving Violence in America, published in January 2016, second edition published in March of 2017. And in this book, the 5 students and I explore the forms of violence, sexual violence, gun violence, domestic violence, elder abuse, child abuse, and the places of violence in the home, in the school, public sphere, at work. And in the process of writing this book, something transformative happened in the classroom. Instead of the students saying, oh, I don't want to go to class, or I don't want to write a paper, the students and I were all of a sudden very eager, recognizing the opportunity we had to possibly make a real difference in addressing this problem of violence in America. And we published this book, Resolving Violence in America. And then I went into my last semester of teaching in spring of 2016. And I taught 2 classes, social psychology and introduction to African American psychology. And following upon the success of the fall semester, I implored my students in those 2 classes to write 2 books. The first was published in January of 2017, entitled Black Lives Matter, Lifespan Perspectives. It's a 350-page or so book written by 25 of my undergraduate students, and it has to date been read over 3,000 times on the internet. It has been used in at least 2 or 3 colleges and universities that I'm aware of, and people are starting to adopt it for various courses in psychology and other places. The other course I taught was social psychology, because it's into our topic for today. I taught a social psychology class, and I asked my students to write a book entitled Social Psychology and World Peace, a primer. I'm very happy to say that it was published just this past May, Social Psychology and World Peace, a primer, and it contains the work of 25 of my undergraduate students plus a few invited chaplains. In doing this work, I would like to claim a paradigm shift in higher education. Because typically on the last day of class, what do students do? On the last day of class, students are typically taking a final exam, turning in a final paper. But on the final day of these classes, what we and our students did was we took a photograph that celebrated their production of scholarship. The classroom session was transformed from as a professor, teaching them the ABCs of social psychology or the ABCs of research methods, to teaching them how to use PsycInfo to draw research from the libraries, how to develop a bibliography and how to distill that bibliography and then organize that bibliography into an outline. So in the class sessions, I'm not talking about social psychology so much as I'm talking about this is how you outline a paper. This is how you draft a paper. And our class sessions were mostly about looking at good and bad writing samples. Students would write a sentence or a paragraph, and we would put that on the screen, and then we would edit it in class to say, this is how you make that writing better. So a lot of our class sessions in psychology were not about psychology at all, but about writing, drafting, revision, punctuation, and things of that sort. And I think the student who exhibited the most success in these writing efforts was Mr. Samuel Martin. And I want to mention too that the process was one where students wrote papers every week. And I selected the best papers for editing, revision, and resubmission so that we could polish them to get them published in the book. Of all the papers that students submitted, only about 10% of them were actually accepted. And Sam, fortunately, had about half of his papers accepted in the book. So let's talk about a couple of papers that Sam did. Sam, you're a senior now. What's your major?
Environmental analysis with a focus in science.
Environmental analysis with a focus in science. And in fact, I see that when we look at your papers, they actually kind of dovetail well with your interests. In fact, one of the things I encourage students to do when they were writing their papers was to write papers around subject matter that would enable them or to be of assistance to them in their future careers. So one of the first chapters that Sam wrote was in part 1 of our book, and he wrote chapter 3, Seeking Peace Through Global Citizenship. So Sam, can you say a little bit about what you were getting at in this particular chapter?
Right, in this chapter I compared individualism and collectivism and made a case for everyone, whether they be students, adults, children, see the world in a different light and try to be good global citizens rather than just being citizens for the United States, for example, being citizens for the world.
Okay, and maybe if we had a sense or a mentality or an identity as a global citizen, then that's a pathway towards world peace. A world leader recently was heard saying in the news that, very proudly, I'm a nationalist. Do you think the idea of being a nationalist is positive or not so positive for world peace? Do you think can you be both a nationalist and a globalist?
I mean, I think you can definitely love your country, but I think it's more important to love the world as a whole. You have to love your neighbor as well as the person who's 5,000 miles away from you. I think it's important to just have a deep caring for humanity in general. So seeing the world not as just, you live in the United States, therefore you're my friend, but seeing you're a human, you have feelings, emotions, you have struggles, therefore you are important and I should help you and we should work together to make something great.
We're all, in many respects, citizens of the world, all one people, one planet. So
Exactly.
Your second chapter, chapter 21, was entitled Global Warming and World Peace. And in many respects, I think you picked up on your earlier idea of global citizenship by talking about global warming as a concern for us all. Can you say more about that?
Right, so in that chapter, I used the example of global warming exacerbating drought in Syria, which led to ISIL basically becoming more successful in the area and the establishment of ISIL in Syria because of the drought that led farmers into the city, which led to the civil war, which led to ISIL and the international terrorism which was a popular thing in the media at the time that we all saw. So I used global warming to show that it's only going to get worse unless we do something, and we have more or less tried to do that. I mentioned some things in the chapter, such as the Paris Climate Accord, which Donald Trump has since stepped the United States out of that agreement. Those things like that are positive step, not things that Donald Trump did, obviously, but things like Obama did in making sure the United States was in that agreement is important for world peace, because we're working with each other to deal with these climate problems, because they're only going to get worse. And establishing that communication and working with one another and understanding the problems that we are all going to face is important. And so that's like developing that global citizenship as well, so that we can face these environmental turn social turn economic problems.
I forget the part number, maybe part 7 of our textbook, the social psychology and world peace is actually organized in 13 parts. The first 12 parts corresponding to the traditional divisions of a social psychology textbook. So in many respects, if you look at our part reviews, it's like looking at a social psychology textbook in shrink wrap. But the group dynamics part is one where it kind of dovetails. I'm skipping ahead over one of your chapters because it echoes some of the points you made in the global warming chapter. And that was chapter 49, climate change, an emblem of political polarization. And again, in this particular chapter, Sam picks up on his concerns about global warming as a concern for all, to use sort of a group dynamic analysis to decry the level of polarization around the issue. I don't know if you want to say more about that.
I think you summarized it pretty well, but basically in that chapter I'm talking about how the political polarization of an issue like climate change just divides us further. And in the scientific community, climate change is acknowledged, and scientists are trying to find solutions to the many problems that are associated with climate change. But when you look in the political atmosphere, you don't see that at all. You see people funding studies that cast doubt and creating the polarization in our societies so that we're unable to deal with these problems soon enough that they become worse over time.
Okay, and I think one of the things that I loved about Sam's writing in the chapter 21, global warming and the global citizenship, is that he ties different disparate aspects together. He looks at the war in the Middle East, the rise of ISIL, the fight over petrochemicals, and the continued conflict to lead to a continued problem of global warming. Also in the chapter 49, the one we were just discussing, climate change, an emblem of political polarization, not only does he decry this horrible extremism that seems to command our political discourse, but he also comes up with a concrete solution to how to overcome that extreme polarization. I don't know if you remember what your idea there was.
Yeah, let me see.
This actually comes out of an earlier section in the social psychology textbook that deals with attitude change and social influence, okay, and using message elaboration, right, in order to help change attitudes. So that people need more information, not less. And a lot of times the extreme polarization occurs because people are oversimplifying the debate that they're engaged in. And so by giving more elaborate information to people, and hopefully some of that polarization can be diminished, and maybe we can get to some solutions. Chapter 44 by Sam. And again, Sam was the most successful of the students, was entitled Pro-Social Behavior for World Peace. This was a chapter in, or a section of the textbook on pro-social behavior and altruism, and Sam's chapter was pro-social behavior and world peace. Would you like to say what your main points there was?
Right, I mean, I was just advocating for altruism. I don't know who wouldn't, but helping your neighbor helps yourself as well. Whenever I'm engaged with the community, I always feel better, like I grow coming out of it, as well as the person that I'm trying to help. So I think it's a win-win, and I'm in this chapter, I'm just describing ways in which we can achieve a more altruistic society, as well as like some of the ways that altruism is perceived in the day-to-day. We tend to help people who might just help us in the future, but I don't think that's what altruism truly should be about. We should just help others because it helps them, and they're gonna pay it forward eventually and help others. So just starting that trend, getting the ball rolling, and we'll get one step closer to world peace, and that's what the goal is. So.
Yeah, one of the points that Sam makes is that studies of altruism demonstrate that people help others, tend to help others who are most similar to themselves, tend to help family members, tend to help neighbors. And I think what the point that Sam is making is that we need to get beyond our immediate circle and to see, it kind of dovetails and echoes back to your point about global citizenship.
Right.
I think altruism has a point that where we can try to help everyone around the world and seen as part of our global responsibility as a global citizen. We were just talking about the global warming chapters, and I forgot to ask a question. I'll just ask it now for the Facebook Live audience, the Instagram Live audience, and for the historical archive audience. Okay, for people to give thought to, why is there so much debate about climate change? And why, in particular, is there an element of those who deny that actions of people are contributing to the global warming problem?
Right, I think that connects perfectly to Al Gore's project, An Inconvenient Truth, and that's exactly what it is. People don't want to believe it because then they have to change themselves, and that's inconvenient to them. And from a personal standpoint, it might be inconvenient in that I can't live in the same way, I can't eat the same things, I can't drive to work, things like that. But in the same way, businesses can't continue to do the same things that they have been doing, polluting in the same ways, producing at the same rates. And that's inconvenient to them because it hurts their bottom line, and it causes us to change as well. So it's convenient in that way. And so some companies and some firms thrive off of that, and they're able to cast doubt. And so people obviously want to believe that doubt because they don't want to change, or they're just similar ideologically, and so they tend to believe that as well. So
I hear your point, and I think it's an excellent one. And it is inconvenient for us as consumers to get off of fossil fuels, to make those kind of sacrifices. But I'm reminded that we, in fact, are consumers. We are the ones who buy the gas. We are the ones who purchase the petrochemical energy. The sellers of the gasoline, the sellers of the petrochemical resources are the ones who are actually making the money. So when we start talking about who profits from denying the fossil-based nature of climate change, it would be the fossil-based fuel industry, who is actually making the money.
Right.
So there is a profit motive in engaging this too. The fifth of the chapters that you published in our book was also an excellent one, and it was entitled, Chapter 50, A Review of Ghosts of Abu Ghraib. You want to tell our audience what Abu Ghraib was, a little background?
Right, I think you could explain it.
Okay. I'll give the background, and we'll talk about his paper.
Right.
Abu Ghraib was a prison in Baghdad, Iraq, that was taken over by U.S. military forces after the 2003 invasion of the U.S. military into Iraq. And Abu Ghraib was then converted into a U.S. military prison, where they would take people that they wanted to interrogate to try to get information about the alleged weapons of mass destruction that were being stored in Iraq. During the course of Operation Iraqi Freedom, after the United States bombed Iraq for a couple of weeks, sent in tens of thousands of soldiers, those soldiers then went house to house in Baghdad and other parts of Iraq and pulled out young men between the ages of 18 and 30 or so, people who could be military of interest or could have served in the military age serving men between the ages of 18 and 30 or so. They put bags over their heads, they put plastic handcuffs on them, and they took them to prison where they would interrogate them and ask them, where are the weapons of mass destruction? Of course, there were no weapons of mass destruction, so those interrogations were fruitless. But in the Abu Ghraib prison, it was discovered that horrendous abuses occurred to the prisoners. Many of the prisoners were tortured, they were stripped naked, they were forced to stand in naked on boxes with wires attached to them. They were given sleep deprivation. They were bombarded with noise. They were forced to perform homosexual acts on each other. And these abuses were photographed. And the photographs came out to alarm the world. A documentary film was made entitled The Ghosts of Abu Ghraib. It's available on the internet. If you search for it, you can find a free version of it to watch. I tasked my 25 social psychology students with writing a movie review of The Ghosts of Abu Ghraib. And 2 of those 25 students were successful in getting getting their essays published in this book, Sam's and another student's. So Sam's chapter reviews of Abu Ghraib. Would you like to say anything about your chapter? I think there were a couple of things remarkable about it, but I'll let you speak for yourself.
Yeah, so in my piece about Abu Ghraib, it was a review of the documentary, as Hal Fairchild mentioned. And so I basically went into, this was the aftermath of 9/11. And you could see, based on what President Bush said, that we wanted payback for the tragedies that occurred on 9/11. And so in doing so, it seems like in the military there was just a blind eye turned to whatever acts would make efforts to pay back the tragedies that happened in 9/11. And so at the end of the movie, George Bush, when he's presented with the materials, the documents that you mentioned, he discounts them and calls them a few bad apples. Some people get demoted, some aren't affected very much, the military personnel that were involved, and they're cast out as bad apples. And I don't think this is what should happen at all. I mean, when these events happen, we tend to, they're publicized for a short period, but then they're forgotten afterwards. But if we truly want to achieve something like world peace, we have to learn from them, right? We need to just don't discount them as a few bad apples. We need to make change, and we need to learn from them to ensure that these tragic events don't happen ever again.
I think there are 2 things that were remarkable about Sam's approach to this paper. One was that he went beyond just reviewing the film to placing the film in its historical context. So he actually went back to 9/11/2001 and reminded the reader where this all started. And the other thing that he didn't mention here, but that he did in the paper, was that he also tied what happened in the prison of Abu Ghraib to the simulated prison that was developed at Stanford University by Philip Zimbardo, a social psychology experiment that people have heard about, the Stanford prison experiment. And he kind of tied those 2 things together to make a very nice reaction, or to put together a nice analysis. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of our half hour, and we're going to kind of bring this a little bit to a close, but I want to thank Sam again, not only for being here today, but for, I would say, his really enthusiastic reaction in the class, where he worked as hard as anybody, if not harder than anybody else in the class, to get his papers published in the book. We have 25 students. Most of the students had 1 chapter, maybe 2. Sam had 5 chapters. Some of the students had no chapters because they just didn't do the work, or the work didn't come up to par. So I want to ask Sam, and one of the things I really noticed about Sam, and I see if he can reflect on it too, is that from your first chapters to the last chapters, it seemed to me as though his writing really grew and blossomed. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about the writing process and your own sense of awareness about the quality of your writing through this process.
Right, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, that's something I wanted to touch upon too. In that class, I was just a second semester, first year. So my writing, I came out of high school, I knew how to write a personal statement and some scientific papers, but never something publishable, like in a book like this. So a class like this, where we delve deeper into word choice and the effectiveness of writing and communicating in ways that are concise but powerful. I thought that this whole process helped me as a writer. And I think if you looked in the book and you read my first chapter and my last, you can tell that I improved, and that made me happy as well. So.
And I think that's true for the other students as well. And what does your future hold for you in terms of writing or?
Right. So I'm still in the job search right now, but I'm hoping to go into conservation or environmental planning or environmental consulting. So if I am in a consultant in some degree, you can imagine that comes with a lot of writing and reading. So being able to communicate effectively in writing the ideas and such as like the Ghost of Abu Ghraib chapter, being able to summarize and pick out the important details and then communicate them in an effective way. I think this class helped me achieve that, definitely.
And I think that it's really a transformation or a transformative experience for me as a professor and for the whole education process as a whole. Because Sam took this class from January to May in 2016. But the last lesson that we gave him was in May 2018, 2 years later, when he could see how we polished a few of his words and tightened up a few sentences where he can say, where we hopefully will say, oh, okay, that's a little bit better than the initial draft. Anyone who has ever published anything has had an editor help them along. And so by editing his papers, he gets to see it 2 years later and he gets that final lesson. Oh, okay, now I get that, how that works a little bit better than the way I originally had it. I'm going to conclude by making a couple of points. Number one, I want to not leave this audience without what we conclude about the problems of violence, the problem of Black Lives Matter, the problems of war and world peace. They all kind of connect in some respects. And I could go on for a couple of hours here, but I'll save the long dissertation by saying that I've concluded that a lot of the problems we see about race, about violence, about war, are driven by ideological forces. They're driven by the way we think, about ideas that we have in our head. And some of the ideas we have in our head are really bad ideas that lead to the problems we're trying to address here. I'm going to at least name what those ideas are. The first one is the idea of male chauvinism, the idea of misogyny or sexism, the idea that men are superior, the idea that men ought to rule things is the first idea that is bad that leads to a lot of these other problems that we're addressing. The second really bad idea is racism. The idea that one race is superior to another and deserves to exploit or oppress another and maybe take their land. And in fact, when you have male supremacy and race supremacy put it together, then you end up with colonialism and enslavement and the taking of land and resources and war. Another bad idea that leads to war and violence is the idea of social Darwinism or survival of the fittest, which leads to the idea of might makes right. If I'm stronger than you, then I'm better than you. But no, you're not. You're just stronger. It doesn't make you better. The fact that you can kill me doesn't make you better than me. It just makes you more lethal. The idea of social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, leads to the idea of militarism, might makes right. And these ideas then, to me, suggest a particular solution. And that solution is that we need to adopt a more peaceful attitude and actually pursue peace as an objective. Okay, final two things. I've concluded that this paradigm shift in making students to be producers of knowledge is the most valuable thing that we as educators can do. And one of the main reasons why I say that is because the content of knowledge otherwise is severely or seriously flawed. The example I like to use is the origination of the university in America. Harvard University was founded in 1636. 1636, the oldest university in America, the grandest university in America, the most prestigious university in America, the richest university in America. But what was going on in the world in 1636, in 1686, in 1736, in 1786, in 1800? What was going on when Harvard was developing its science and technology and philosophy and theology in its university? What was going on? It was European conquest and discovery, the enslavement of Africans, the killing of indigenous Americans, the stealing of New Zealand, Australia, Fiji, Tonga, and Hawaii, and making those countries into Europe's image. And the university, in its theology and philosophy and anthropology and political science and everything else, gave license to that plunder of the rest of the planet. So that what we teach in the colleges and university is severely tainted by the biases that are attendant to that history of exploitation. And the one example I like to leave with you, and I want everybody who's listening both in real time and in the future to answer this question as I ask it, okay? Just something that we all know. And there's a few people in the background in the audience right here who are also sitting listening. I want you to all answer this question in your mind. And just the first number that comes to your mind when I ask the question, just think about it. How many continents are there? What number did you think?
7.
7. What number did you think? 7. 7. 7. 7. Everybody here said 7. And the only way you can get to 7 continents is by including Europe as one of the 7. I don't have anything against Europe. I've been to Europe, I love Europe. But Europe is not a continent. A continent is defined as a large landmass that's relatively isolated from other landmasses. If you think of, put them in your minds, and you put a picture of Europe in your mind, you can see that Europe is connected to Poland and Eastern Europe and Russia and China. It's all one land. It's not a separate continent. You cannot get to 7 continents without including Europe as one of the 7. This is sort of indelible lesson that our storehouse of knowledge that is taught in colleges and universities and K through 12 is severely tainted by a Eurocentric bias. So severe that they would have us believe that Europe is a continent when our eyes can tell us otherwise. These 3 books, Resolving Violence in America, 2nd edition, Black Lives Matter, Lifespan Perspectives, Social Psychology and World Peace, are available at Amazon, Amazon Prime, Kindle, and free PDF download. Okay, so if you search for it on the internet, you can find a free PDF download. All royalties that result from these books, if any should arise, are going to be donated to Pitzer College. And none of these books would have happened were it not for the help and assistance of the spouse of my spouse and the woman of my dreams, Heather Fee-J Fairchild, who I'm going to pull her on camera right now. Just come over here, come over here, come over here. And this is, this is Heather, and I just want to say I got to give shout out and props to my wife of almost 4 years, who she followed me as I developed these projects and encouraged me and sat by my side as I was doing the editing, and then would come behind me and edit after me. And then we would print it out and we would edit together, and we had notebooks side by side, and we took vacations with the notebooks, editing these books. Every paper in here got edited by the students 2 or 3 times and got edited by us 5 or 6 times at least. So anyway, thank you, baby. And that's it. Okay, so we're going to close out. I want to thank you one more time. We've got Sam Martin, Heather Fee-J Fairchild, and I'm Halford Fairchild, Professor Emeritus, and this is Pitzer College coming to you live on Facebook, Instagram, and Historical Archive.